So thank you all for coming. My name is Gwyneth Sigmund, or Gwyneth Whistlewood, or Gwyneth the Feral Flute. It is a hazard of being a performer that you collect extra names as you perform in various places. And I am what is known as an improvising player. So I have a tendency to make up music on the spot. This also resulted in me becoming a composer, much to my extreme shock, because that was also not one of my plans. So let me just go ahead and dive in. And I'm going to start off with one of my specialties, which is I don't have a thought in my head, so I don't have any clue what is about to happen. You'll find out just as soon as I do. So as you can see, one of the things I really love is all the different sounds that the flutes make. I'm going to stick with this one for at least one more tune. And I think what I'm going to play for you is the very first tune that I ever wrote, which I'm still struggling to name. Usually when I don't give you names, it means it's new, I'm still working on it. I have to admit that's not the case with this one. about studying music was there's a lot of theories about how music progresses. And in the classical world, they're really fond of saying that music likes to start on the tonic and then rise to a peak and then fall for the end. And they're really ignoring a lot of music that doesn't follow that pattern. Like there's a lot of music that rises throughout or that starts high and falls. So I have a lot of fun trying to mess with that pattern, which is one of the things I do in that piece. So, one more tune on this one. So let's go ahead and talk about some historical music. I'm going to play a troubadour song for you next. So this song is about 900 years old. It was written by a woman named Beatrice, the Countess of Dia. That is almost everything that we know about her. She lived 900 years ago and wrote music and said that was her name. We kind of think Dia might be in France somewhere, maybe, unless it isn't. Troubadour music is really fascinating to me because we have some of it written down, but it's not written down completely. We usually have the notes and the lyrics at most. There's almost no indication of rhythm. There are long books and thesis papers speculating about how you work out the rhythm so that you play it exactly the way they intended, but all of them end up having to admit that this music changed every time it was played, and that even when it was written down, that was considered an excuse to come up with a new version of the melody. So we have multiple versions of the same tune running around. The words for this one very roughly translate to, "It is mine to sing of what I would rather not. All my wealth, all my virtue, all my beauty, it's as if they don't exist, because the girl that I love doesn't love me." Not at all atypical for troubadour music. What is different is when we get to the end, we flip it around and say, well, you know, if you can't appreciate me, then I will go find someone who will. Well, I have to admit, actually, this is one of the risks of a live performance. I didn't play what I intended to play at all. There was apparently a whole other tune that wanted to come out. It's one of my own, fresh off the back of my brain. It was heavily influenced by the troubadour music, but it was not the tune that I intended. Music has a life of its own. It's, you know, all you have to do is start being an improviser. You'll figure that out. So I'm going to switch instruments next. One of the very first atypical instruments that I ever got a hold of was a glass flute. which glass flutes have actually been around, so far as we can tell, as long as glass has. Not very many of them survive for obvious reasons, and they were never the most popular choice, but they have a whole different sound to them than any other material. And let's have a go at a tune that is called A Jaunt in the Flint Hills. Another go at that troubadour song I told you about. See if it will come out this time. Was in fact what I intended to do that time. One of the fascinating things about the medieval and Renaissance music is that it typically uses what we call modes, which are scales that don't quite sound normal to us because we're really used to the major minor modes. And there's been a lot of speculation as to why we switched from modes to major minor, and I'm not sure that any of them are right. But what I do know is that we still use modes in folk music today. So anytime you hear Irish music, they're probably playing in the modal system, which is why the notes are just a little different than what we would expect. And on that note, I'm going to play something modal for you. Next, I'm going to play one of my tunes that I've gotten around to naming. It's called The Last Star at Dawn. Maybe not the most original of titles, but I created this tune because there's a lot of morning songs. They tend to be about how morning is bright and shiny and we're so cheerful and chipper. And yeah, I don't feel like that first thing in the morning. I need a good pot of coffee or something before I can get there. So I wanted a little bit more of my speed of a morning song. Didn't realize this is a penny whistle that I'm playing. It's just made out of wood, dogwood specifically, if you're curious about that kind of thing. We're used to the metal penny whistles, but I love the sound of the wooden ones. So that's why I sprang for that one. The other there's a lot of wonderful stuff about penny whistles. They're actually really new instruments. Penny whistle as we know them were invented in the 1800s or so, and they're considered folk instruments, which means that everyone who makes them their own way. So they're all slightly different from each other. So they're actually all still evolving as an instrument. And the low whistles, which this is an example of, are one of the styles of the penny whistle that are becoming more popular. People are becoming more familiar with them. They're a lot of fun. I'm going to switch gears and play somebody else's music aside from the troubadour music, which is meant to be improvised anyway. And I'm going to play a song by O'Carolan, who wrote a lot of traditional Irish music. This song is called The Farewell to Music. I've seen people describe this as kind of a throwback to the older style of Irish music when O'Carolan first started composing, but my take on this piece is he was putting everything that he knew about music into this piece. It is deceptively simple. Every single note is very precisely chosen. Go ahead and switch instruments again. There's method to my madness. This is an example of a Baroque flute. This is a style of flute that came into existence somewhere around the 1620s or so. They had so many different styles of flute in the Baroque era, it's not even funny. There's a lot of, you read music history books and they say things like, oh, they're improving their instrument. That's not what was happening at all. because they had so many different styles of music in the Baroque era, they had to have different kinds of instruments for all the different kinds of music. So people were playing this instrument pretty much up until the 1850s, when the flute was kind of standardized and turned into the precursor of the modern one there, although this is a direct ancestor of that as well. The reason why I'm pulling it out is this is the kind of flute, one of the kinds of flutes that was in use when O'Carolan was composing. So it's the sort of instrument that he would have been familiar with. That's the same era as J.S. Bach as well, by the way. And now I'm just going to wing it and make something up on the spot. So yes, I love the historical instruments because once again, you get a totally different sound out of them. It's kind of amusing to me because you meet a lot of the classically trained flute players and you show them an instrument like this and they go, oh no, I could never play that. It's not the lack of keys that scares them. That they can handle. It's playing a mouthpiece that doesn't have that lip plate that alarms them. I'm not sure why, because I don't notice much of a difference between having the lip plate and not having it. Maybe I'm just weird.
We won't say anything.
You're among friends.
Decisions. What shall I pull out next? I have not played the alto flute yet, or as a friend of mine calls it, that goosenecked one. You are more likely to see this with a straight head joint rather than a curved one, but I'm short, and not having to reach as far helps a lot, and I accidentally acquired one with the curved head joint, so I use it. And, yes, I do know what I'm going to play for you, but it does not have a name yet. started improvising was, I took all those theory classes where they make you do voice leading and say, avoid these intervals. I'm like, but all those intervals you want me to avoid, they're my favorites. So now I get to use them as much as I want. Yay! And my mind has gone blank, so you're going to get something entirely off the cuff once again. This is heavier, so there's a reason why you don't usually see hour-long performances on the alto flute. The weight on your thumb is massive. You wouldn't think it would matter that much, but it does. So next, this is one of my newer instruments. It doesn't really have an official name. Sometimes it's called a double whistle or a double flute or a harmony whistle or a harmony flute or a drone whistle or a drone flute. It is developed from, I think, at least two sources, probably more instruments are like that. One is at Irish sessions, you get the whistle player drunk and you have them play two whistles at once. The other is indigenous music, especially South American music, has a huge tradition of playing multiple flutes by one player. And I think that that has heavily influenced us and caused us to create this, whatever it is. nothing I play on this has a name yet, because I say it is my newest instrument. And therefore, I'm going to play something else for you that doesn't have a name. Let's do one more on this. See what we can do with this pattern. Switch to a different penny whistle. And the song I'm going to play for you next has a story behind it. Many of them do, but this one has a very specific one. I was out walking, and on one side there was a meadow that had a meadowlark singing in it. Not unusual. The other side had a forest in it that happened to have a woodlark singing in it. And they were not quite singing the same melody, but it was distinctly similar. And yeah, I kind of stopped in the middle of the meadow in the forest and listened to the two and went, and then ran home and got my whistle out and attempted to write stuff down. That is the starting point for this tune. whistles can get a little aggressive in an interior space. I'm going to switch out again. And I'm going to pull out a rim-blown flute for you. The whistles are all what we call fipple flutes, means there's a hole that you blow through, it guides your breath. The transverse flutes are what we call blockless flutes. You know, your lips are part of the mouthpiece. The same thing is true for the rim-blown flutes. You're blowing across the rim, just like you're playing a soda bottle. This is actually a custom-made flute. It is sort of based off of the ancestral Pueblo flutes that were dug up in the Four Corners region, but the tuning's different and the size is different because I wanted to do something else with that. So it's a mutt. Played through a whole bunch of the instruments, I like to ask if there is anyone in particular that somebody wants to hear more of.
I really enjoy the double one.
You like the, all right. Well, in that case.
I gave them a couple of seconds, but they didn't speak up.
Yeah. Well, they can
Snooze,
ask
you
again
lose.
after that. This is another custom-made instrument. It is a double one. The native style flutes have a pattern of doing drone whistles. This one is not made in a native tuning. Because once again, we did something different with it. Absolutely.
This one, you said that it's not tuned, do you mean it's not tuned to what we,
To what we associate with the native.
like middle C and the?
No, there's actually a different scale that they usually use for the
different
native
scale.
flutes.
Okay,
Yeah,
I
and
got
this
you.
is still using a diatonic tuning,
Okay.
which, I mean, the scale that we currently have associated with the native style flutes is absolutely related to the native flutes historically, but it has been changed and modified by the European influence. And there's actually multiple scales that go with those flutes, and it's really complicated, and I don't have it all sorted out. The fascinating thing about those tunings is they're scales that are relatively approachable. So a lot of people will describe the native flutes as ones that beginners can sound good on, and one reason is those scales. This one is a little feisty, so I don't necessarily ask too much of it. But let's just keep on with the double instrument theme, because there are globular flutes as well. Those are flutes that don't have end holes for sound to come out, which means this is actually one of my quieter instruments here. This is an ocarina, which ocarinas have an extremely complex history. They're one of the many, all the flutes pop up all around the world kind of independently. But the ocarina as we know it got its start in South America. And then the Spanish came over and went, wow, those are really cool. And took them back to Europe, and people went, wow, those are really cool, let's change them. And then they went back to South America, and they went, oh, well, hey, that's a good idea, we'll use that, but we won't do that. And back and forth they went. So this is a double ocarina. As I said, the doubles are all kind of my newest addition. I'm still working out what all they can do. They're all different. This one was possibly one of the most confusing fingering-wise, because the fingerings work entirely differently on this than all the others. So I'm going to pull out the concert flute for you, and I have to tell you a little bit of a story for this next tune. Sorry, politics, but it feeds in. The music came out of these politics. So a while back, I decided I should get a new passport, and I was told that because I was not born in a hospital, that my birth certificate, state issued, race seal, signed, shows my parents, no longer counts as proof of citizenship.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was alarming. It did get fixed, but it's something that has been happening to a lot of people, and it got me to thinking about, how do you prove that you were born? It's when you are here on the earth and breathing, how else can you possibly prove that you were born?
Unless you just God.
Yeah, exactly. And one of my answers for myself is, well, I make art out of breath. And that is what this song is about. It's my proof of birth. have completely lost track of the time and where we're at here.
We got plenty of time.
All right. So, what haven't I played yet? Oh, I know what I will. This, a while back, they dug up a flute in a cave and dated it to being about 40,000 years old. And some crazy person got a hold of the specs for it and made a flute based on those measurements. So what we have here, it's not exactly, he tweaked it a little to make it just a little easier to play because, you know, it's kind of broken up, so some things had to be guessed at. But what we have is a flute with the scale that they were using 40,000 years ago. I don't usually play this one very much, but it's just fun to have. Yeah, I'm gonna pull out the alto, the gooseneck again. We'll do some more off-the-cuff stuff for you. I'm going to do next is something along the lines of how I got started improvising, although I didn't quite realize that's what I was doing. I went out into the woods and took a tune that I knew and just tried to figure out how to add ornaments to it. And in the process of doing that, ran into an interval that I loved and played it over and over. And it developed from there until I was playing folk tunes, or I would tell my family I was playing folk tunes, and they would go, I didn't recognize that. What was it? And I'd tell them, and they'd go, no, that was something else. So my jumping off point here is another O'Carolyn's tune, unless it's not, things get attributed to him by accident sometimes, and this may be one of them. But it gets called O'Carolyn's Air. And it's one of the early folk tunes that I played musical origami with. Thing about that is stopping every time.
You don't have to.
Well, but you do have to eventually.
Well, eventually.
Yeah. There's a quote from somewhere around that compares music to enlightenment. That what music shows you how to do is how to appreciate the moment as it's passing. Because the note only lasts so long. But then it leads to the next note, and then the next note, and then the next note. So even when it's gone, it still has presence. And I pulled this out without a thought of what I was going to do on it. But now I think what I'm going to do is, this is fairly new territory for me. I'm going to take a folk tune that I play and twist around a lot and attempt to play it on this whistle. Which, because I've got two, we'll see how well that works. This is a song that's called Dunmore Lassies. It's played both slow and fast. I heard the Chieftains do a slow version once. I love the slow version, so that's what I do. actually think, I said the hardest thing was stopping. I think it's even harder to stop when you're playing an Irish tune because they're not supposed to stop. They're supposed to segue into another tune. So you gotta figure out how to round them off, at least if you want to catch your breath. Does anybody have a flute they want to request again in particular, or shall I just?
They're all good.
I already had my turn.
That doesn't mean you can't ask for another one, or the same one.
May we hear the glass flutes?
Yes. You know what? I've got a glass flute that I have not played yet.
Wonderful.
Ooh. And we're getting it recorded right here.
Yeah.
History being made.
The glass flutes and the penny whistles and any keyless instrument, they typically make them in a whole bunch of different sizes. And that's because you can't really change keys on them very effectively. So by making them in a different size, you get a different key. I'm gonna warn you, the smaller the flute gets, the louder it gets. So the little bitty version of the flute, this was the military instrument. One of the differences between the penny whistle style and the transverse style is the penny whistle, you have relatively little control over the volume. It has to be in a certain volume range for the notes to play at all. For the transverse flute style, you have considerably more options, so you can back off on some of the notes, which you just can't do with the whistle. On the flip side, the whistle is all about breath control. You need breath control for the transverse flute, but you can fake it by shaping your lips a different way. And that doesn't work on the whistles. So you actually need more breath control for those instruments. And my teacher side comes out. And another tune that I haven't named yet. another one on the Baroque flute here. And what I'm going to see if I can make come out is play another troubadour song for you. This one I don't have a full translation of the lyrics, sorry. This one is 800 years old as opposed to 900 years. So it's just a very young tune. Shifting rhythms, they're in the original tune. What I did with them was maybe not so medieval, but that's all right. And where are we at anyway? Oh wow, yeah, lots of time. I really like this one right now, all of a sudden. People sometimes ask me which is my favorite flute. The answer is it changes minute by minute. So I can't seem to pick one and stick with it, so I don't try anymore. one is, I think, called Rose Soul, unless I change my mind again. I did not realize, but I was tapping into some Welsh roots with that one for its name and its story. So I'm going to switch back to the concert flute, which was my very first love. Technically, it's not the first kind of flute that I played. The first one I played was a big, giant bamboo flute that I couldn't reach the finger holes on, that my dad showed me how to get sound out of, and I went, that, I want that. And here we are. I'm gonna do next, this is another experimental thing, so if it falls totally flat, I will stop if it seems like I'm torturing you. It's something I'm still trying to get worked out on this double whistle. I'm gonna take a tune that I've already played here once tonight, O'Carolyn's Farewell to Music, and try to play it on this. When it has worked in the past, it's been fantastic, and it's a whole different piece. playing one more, and then maybe winding down, and sound about right? Okay. You can twist my arm into playing more, but stopping is good too. So.
You do have his memorized.
Oh, good. I always wonder. I know I mesmerize myself, but that's maybe not what we're after, really. I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to play one of. I periodically memorize new folk tunes because it's a good memory exercise and because they're fun, and that way I get to play them. So this is one of the ones that I've memorized relatively recently. It's called Banish Misfortune. We'll just have to see what happens as I play it, too. Thank you all for coming out.
One more?
Sure.
Okay, yeah.
Have a flute you want to hear it on?
I like one of the two.
One of the doubles?
Doubles,
Right.
yeah. So.
We're recording in stereo, you see.
I'm going to switch to a double I haven't played. This was actually the first one I got. It was the cheap impulse buy because I figured I couldn't go too far wrong. I had no idea what a slippery slope I was heading down. It's not too different from the other.
you.
I need to pass this around for Gwyneth.
I do have cards and CDs and whatnot, but